Welcome back to my channel, Stamp Cat Stamps, where I share with you the unusual things that I learned from my stamp collection. Today I have a quick special Halloween episode for you. I'll be sharing with you some stamps from the Haunted Canada series. The Haunted Canada series was issued by Canada Post from the years 2014 to 2016. In total, it has 15 stamps, and they all highlight spooky stories from across our nation. Since lately I've been sharing with you a bit about the history of Quebec through stamps, I thought I'd stick with the same theme and focus on the ghosts from Quebec. Okay, let's have a look. I'm gonna take this off now. So first of all, just a really quick mention, because I've already talked a lot about him before in one of my previous episodes. Our dear Louis de Bode, Count Frontenac, the lavishly dressed governor of New France. He haunts the halls of the Chateau Frontenac, dressed in his finest 17th century garb, and he may or may not have tried to mail his heart in a box to a fiancée in France after he died. But since I've already talked a lot about Louis before, let's move on to some new ghosts. This first one is Marie-Joseph Corriveau, or known simply as La Corriveau. She was a real person born in 1733 in Saint-Vallier, across from Quebec City, and she was born into a farming family. When she was 16 years old, she married her first husband, Charles Bouchard, in 1749. At the time, 16 was a normal age for a young lady to be married. He was also a farmer, and records show that as a part of their wedding gift, her parents gave them a plot of land for them to live on and farm. They had 3 children together, but after 11 years of marriage in 1760, he passed away. The widowed Marie Corriveau quickly remarried her second husband just 1 year later, Louis Dodier, in 1761. But after just 2 years in their marriage, he also died, and the circumstances for his death were a little bit suspicious. He was killed from a head trauma, and the local people suspected that Marie and her father Joseph had something to do with it. She and her father were tried and sentenced in a British tribunal. Her father was sentenced to death by hanging, and Marie received a lesser sentence. But during his confession to a priest, her father confessed that actually she was the one who killed her husband and not him. She was tried again in a second trial, and this time she confessed to killing him. Turns out he was actually pretty physically abusive during their marriage. The British court-martial sentenced her to death by hanging, but also ordered that her body be strung up in chains and put on display for everyone to see. They made a special cage for her called a gibbet and hung it at the crossroads of what is now the Boulevard L'Entente and Rue de Saint-Joseph. The local French people were horrified by this display, and many a ghost story developed about the hanging body of La Corriveau. Some said that she was a witch and not only killed her second husband, but also her first. And as time went on, her 5th and 6th and 7th husbands too. And if you passed too close to her hanging cage at night, she would grab you through the bars and steal your soul. Her body hung there for 40 days until it was taken down and buried in the cemetery near the Saint Joseph de Lévis church. To put things a little bit more into context, remember that this was right after the end of the 7 Years' War. New France had just been taken over by the British. That adds to some of the peculiarities to the story, like why she was tried by a British military tribunal instead of a civic court, which would have been normal. The British were so new to power that they hadn't finished setting up all of the proper infrastructure yet. And the British, being the new tough leaders, wanted to make a big show of authority to all of the people and let them know just what happens to those who break their new rules. Sentencing her to be hung up by a gibbet was actually extreme even for British standards, but to the French, it was considered downright barbaric. Even in France, people weren't hung up by the gibbet after they were sentenced. The French families had just suffered losses from the war, they were living under new rulers who didn't even speak their language, and now they were hanging up dead bodies from the trees. Of course it was a really scary time for them and had a lot of uncertainty as to how their new future would look. The actual cage or gibbet that Le Corriveau was hung in actually has its own story in history too. It was dug up from the church cemetery in 1850 and stolen by grave robbers. From there, it found its way to a traveling circus owned by P.T. Barnum and was shown across many cities in North America where people came to view it as a ghoulish curiosity. It arrived at a museum in Boston, Massachusetts and eventually made its way to the Essex Peabody Museum in Salem, Massachusetts in 1899. There it stayed for over 100 years and was largely forgotten about until only recently. A museum employee was doing some research and came across this cage. Turns out it had been mislabeled. It was filed under a different name, the Widow Bouchard, instead of Le Corriveau, and they also had slightly misspelled the name of the French town that it came from. This worker thought this might be the actual cage of Le Corriveau. An investigation followed, which involved making sure it was authentic, testing the iron that it was made of to verify that it matched the time period, and it turns out that it was real. Since then, it's been recovered and sent back to Quebec, where it's now on display, the Musée de la Civilisation in Quebec City. The story of Le Corriveau has been the subject of many works of history, including books, a play, a song, a ballet, a documentary, and art projects. While most of it is speculative and portrays her as an evil witch sorceress, I like this more recent art project by visual artist Marion Galinas that gives us a different way of looking at Le Corriveau as a tragic young French woman trapped in a world of patriarchy by her abusive husband and then authorities who wanted to make a tough example of her. And then the last stamp that I'll share with you today is La Dame Blanche, the Lady in White. This stamp shows the story of Mathilde Robin and Louis Tessier. It's the year 1759, and they're a young couple in love in the town of Beauport, just east of Quebec City. They spent many a day together going on walks, enjoying the view of the Montmorency Falls. He was approved by her family to be a suitable man, and they got engaged. She worked hard for many months, sewing her own wedding dress and veil. But wait, 1759, isn't that... Yes. One night, an alarm was sounded. English soldiers were spotted coming to attack their town. All of the men went off to fight and defend them, while the women and children hid. After days of fighting, cries of victory were heard. The French had defeated the English. As the soldiers walked back to town, Mathilde waited for her Louis to appear, but he never did. Unfortunately, he was one of the casualties of that battle. In her grief, Mathilde put on her carefully crafted wedding dress and veil. She went to the Montmorency Falls, where they had spent so much time together, and jumped off the top of it. As she fell, her veil flew away from her hair, and the next day, a new small waterfall was seen for the first time, the Bridal Veil Falls. Today, some people say they still see a woman dressed in white in the depths of the water. It's La Dame Blanche. Unlike Le Corriveau, Mathilde and Louis don't seem to be actual real historical people, although I'm sure her story would resonate with any French woman in love with a soldier at the time of the 7 Years' War. Another reason the story is unlikely is the tradition of wearing a white wedding dress didn't start until the 1840s. It was popularized when Queen Victoria married Prince Albert. Before that, wearing white wasn't necessarily a custom. What I like about these ghost stories from Quebec is that they all take place right around the time of when the British took over. So even though these stamps are largely based off of ghost stories or folklore, they still give us a lot of insight into real actual historical events that took place and the way that these events affected the common local people who lived there. Okay, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this quick Halloween episode about some of the stamps from the Haunted Canada series. Take care for now, have a spooky Halloween, stay safe and stay curious. Bye! Oh, where's my dogs? Oh, they're here. Okay.